verses, masterpieces of Persian calligraphy from the Islamic Arts Museum in Malaysia. And most recently, she created an exhibition which was held first at the museum there and then went on to be at the forefront in the opening of the Islamic collection of the British Museum in London. So I'm delighted that she's here today to talk on this topic, the arabesque. So please welcome Dr. Barakat.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Of course, I grew at AUC, but not exactly this AUC. But still, I am very much affiliated with this institution. And for the past 18 years, I've been working with the Islamic Arts Museum in Malaysia. Of course, I am not based all the time in Malaysia, but I commute between Malaysia and different parts of the world. Today, I am here in Cairo, and I am happy to introduce one of our most recent publications and exhibitions that is now taking place and is going to still run for one entire year at the British Museum, Al-Bukhari Gallery for the Islamic World. And this is the newly launched collection of the British Museum. We had the honor to actually curate an exhibition, and it was a challenge because we had to compete with the riches of the British Museum. And of course, our museum is still, in its infant stage. We've been up and running for the past 20 years. But we decided to come up with an idea. And the idea was to look into the arabesque leaves. And this was a journey of discovery, and it was a very interesting one indeed. So when we talk about the arabesque, we talk about a motif comprising a leaf and a stem. The leaf bifurcates, splits, and out of one of its tips, develops further a stem. And the stem further develops into a leaf, and so on and so forth. So in reality, we are talking about a small motif, and I want today to share with you the story of this arabesque. So when we talk about the arabesque, it is this leaf at the beginning, which is number A, and it has split already, and out of its tip, it's going to form another stem. But it never stands alone, and it never stands in vacuum. So it is in its most common formation, it is mirror imaged. And accordingly, I have the second design, which is this one. It is two arabesque leaves in a mirror image formation. In some cases, it is flattened, and accordingly, you see the leaves, but it is still our unit. So now we are talking about one unit. And in time, it started to mature horizontally and vertically. So as we see in this tile, which is one of the tiles from the Shahi Zinda, and it is 14th century, and it is part of a muqarnas. But still, what do I see? I see the formation of two units of this simple formation, mirror image, two leaves stacked together. So now that we have looked into what is an arabesque, let's get to see how does it actually present itself in architecture here in the world. This is the most common formation, which is bifurcated with two leaves and two tips, each tip leading to another stem and so on. But in another situation, it is not a face view, but a side view like this one, and that is the side view of the same arabesque leaf scroll that we're talking about. And in some cases, it is contracted and it looks like this one. So it has different views, and you can see it from different sides. So we do not only call this an arabesque, but this also is an arabesque, and that is an arabesque as well. Arabesque is versatile, it is adaptable, it can actually conquer a whole gown like this one. This is an Ottoman robe from the 19th century, and you can see there is the arabesque scroll, and its tips transform into another arabesque scroll. So these are our units, and we can see it all the way with a different variation. We can also see it in metal from a Safavid ewer, and we can see it in its flattened position, as this one in here. So we can see it on and on, wrapping the entire ewer. But we can also see it fitted in a very small compartment, and that is, it becomes a unit. And we see it in this kinda, in this unit, and we can see it going up and down, up to its tip. So it is, because it is versatile and it is adaptable, it actually was easy to move all around the Islamic world. You can adapt it in different medias, but you can also adapt it in different ideas. It has different terms, or different terms came to be known as arabesque, and one of them is the palmet. And why is that? Because this is an arabesque leaf, but it has this serrated, and this splitting and serration creates this effect of a palm tree, and accordingly it was called a palm. Now that we know what is an arabesque, we ask ourselves, okay, what happened? How did it develop? From where did it come? What is the origin of an arabesque? In all designs, it doesn't come from nowhere, and for years and years, the Muslims have been using the decorative repertoire, which is available in the Arabia area, in the Umayyad period, and up to the Abbasid period. So what is the origin of this arabesque? We know that there must have been some influences. One of the influences is the classical designs, and that is what we call the vine leaf, which is like a leaf which looks like a hand with multiple sections in here, and this is a close-up of it. This is a bronze infant burner from the collection of the Islamic Arts Museum, Malaysia, and it dates to the 11th and 12th century. And what you see is a collection of these hand-like vine leaves, and they are connected with stems, but they are not yet an arabesque. And of course, we can also see it in the capitals from the Medina the Medina al-Zahra, exactly, in the Iberian Peninsula and Spain. And we see also some kind of a leaf formation that is building up. And that is also from the 10th century, but we are still not at the level of describing any of this as our leaf scroll, our arabesque. And even when we look at the Umayyad mosque in Damascus, and we look at this formation, which reminds us with the Arkansas leaves and their scrolls, we still have not reached that position. That can be one influence, and that is the back drop of the minds of these scholars and these designers and artists and artisans. But what else? Well, of course, in Egypt, we see it being transferred here at the Mosque of Tulum, and we see also the beginning of something that may in the future be the arabesque. But also, we have to look towards Persia, and we have to see that at one point the Sassanids used to have a winged formation, and this winged formation, which almost looks like this, but this is more stylized, is something that was carried from Persia to Arabia and was embedded into the Umayyad and Abbasid art and designs. And this Sassanid winged formation may have actually, in the process of development, turned into what we call a split leaf. It's not exactly, but we know that they can be the origin of the arabesque, as it looked like a split leaf in a way, and it is in a way not one example at that one which I'm showing you now from the Abbasic period, and this is a folio from the Quran, but also from other folios like this one, which is also the development of this concept of Sassanid wing into a split leaf. So there are many actually options when we talk about the origin of the arabesque, but all of this is not really yet an arabesque. For almost 400 years, from the 7th century until the 11th century, the Muslims have tried to develop something that is their own. They, of course, have incorporated a lot of designs and a lot of ideas, but still it was at the back of their mind to develop something that may be new to them and becomes part of their repertoire. And why is that? We feel that it was because of the pressure of the theologians. The theologians were the ones who were trying to tell them to move away from figure representation, from the presentation of perhaps the gardens of paradise, as we have seen it in the mosaics of the Dome of the Rock, into something that is more ambiguous and is more stylized. So of course we to that stage where we see the Samara style developing. And through the Samara style, and this is the period which we call the experimentation stage, where we start to see leaf formations coming in and out of these ambiguous units. And by the time that it comes to Ibn Tulun in the 9th century and even later, we start to see some kind of a leaf that may split, but does not yet become an arabesque. Yet it becomes the step forward towards presenting an arabesque leaf scroll. When we look further, we see that the minute the arabesque leaf was conceived, or that it popped up in this Islamic world, it actually was easily adaptable to all of the repertoires from around the world. It went up to Anatolia, to Persia, down to Arabia, and to North Africa and Spain. So it was generated here, and in time it became a language that all of these countries were actually using. In time, we have seen it in the Nishapuri plates, but also in the 15th century, depicted in the Khamsa of Nizami, in one of these miniatures, and it is seen in the hoods of the tents. We also see it in Imam Shafi'i's carved wood, Samtov, and so on. But our first encounter with anything that may be called an arabesque is actually at the tips of the letters. So in a way, the arabesque found its space to adorn the tips of letters. First the Kufi, and then it ventured into the Naskh at a background. So by the 12th century, we have already seen it starting to emerge in the Abbasid plates, but then it really became a split leaf that actually works its way in and out and around the letters. Then when we see it in the Naskh, we see it as a background, and as you can see here, it is by now a proper arabesque leaf that is flourishing and happy to present itself and to create a space for itself. Having attached the arabesque leaf to calligraphy gave it a lot of strength. Calligraphy is very important in the Muslim world. Anything that attached to the word of God gives it a completely different approach, and people started to accept this leaf scroll just because it was related to the word of God. So it became the most appropriate decorative element used in religious manuscripts, in inscriptions inscription bands which had the Quran as a script, and also in Benedictine units because it would relate to the Arabic language. So the other thing that attaching the arabesque leaf to calligraphy, it gave it a spiritual dimension. If this is real or not, we can together think about it. Okay, when we started to analyze the arabesque leaf scroll, we realized that it has rhythm. Rhythm is something very important in the arabesque leaf. So rhythm. The arabesque moves up and down, up and down. It moves in a very ordered manner. And this rhythm reminds us of the command from the Quran that actually tells the reciters to recite the Quran in a rhythmic movement. So in a way, we can relate, and perhaps the craftsmen and artists during the Abbasid period also felt the same. But it's not only rhythm, it also has this eternal effect, and it is infinite. It doesn't have a beginning, it does not have an end. It can go on and on and on. And in a way, it reflects the bounty of God, that it is always there and onwards. We rise and fall as dynasties, but it still continues. So in a way, also the arabesque leaf scroll is in a sense of, has a sense of eternity and infinity. Of course, beyond doubt, it is a leaf. Originally, it relates to the leaf formations, and it reminds us with the gardens of paradise. And also the idea of a palmetta. The palm tree is one of these trees that we know that it was there it is there in the gardens of bliss. But not only the palmet as a palmet, but the leaf itself, the waraqa. We know that in the verses related to Adam and Eve and the gardens when they were expelled from the gardens of paradise, we know that we have a mention of waraqa, from the waraq, from the leaves of paradise. So all of this is actually working towards the idea of giving the arabesque its spiritual dimension. Repetition. And we know that in the Quran, a lot of verses has been repeated over and over and over. It does not actually, the repetition of the arabesque leaf everywhere does not lessen from its design, but actually, in a way, it emphasizes the importance of this design element. And also, we feel that the arabesque is based on order and symmetry. In order to be able to understand the arabesque leaf scroll, we have to understand it in the context of order, because this is the only way that a design can perpetuate and cover all of the beautiful tiled buildings of Sudan, for example. So in a way, all of these components are there, and perhaps that is one of the reasons that the arabesque leaf scroll revives and stays up to the 21st century. But let's get a look at the development of the arabesque leaf scroll in history. What happened? In 1250, we know that the Mongols came and they destroyed Baghdad, and we know that there was a spread of the scholars all around. Some went to Persia, Anatolia, to North Africa. And we know that there was an introduction of new decorative designs coming with the what we call the Chinese style, which is what we call the Kitai or Kitai, and that is like the lotus flower, the peonies, the Chinese cloud scrolls. We all have seen that. And of course, they were very welcomed in our repertoire. We see it in architecture, we see it in minor arts as well. But when we start to analyze up during the 1500s, the Ottoman Empire, for example, we start to understand that there were two modes of design. One of them is the arabesque leaf scroll, the one that you know, that it splits and it actually creates this mirror image formation, and its tips actually transfers into further. We know this now by heart. Okay, but we also have another design which is very much from the Hittite repertoire, and they don't yet intermingle. They are actually superimposed on each other to produce this beautiful Ottoman Turkish tile that dates to the 1520s. So what happened later on? By 1560s and by 1580s, the arabesque is now in a position that we want to push it aside. No more. We don't want the arabesque. It is the old school. We want the new school. And also the Ottomans started to produce other designs, like for example the saz leaf, the carnation, and more tended to go towards naturalism. So in a way we started to see that the arabesque was pushed aside to the spandrels of beautiful arched compositions like this, or even like this in the spandrel. And here we have the Chinese cloud scroll. In here we have still the superimposed two modes of decoration. But the arabesque leaf needed to develop itself as well. Otherwise it would die out. So during the Ottoman period, we started to see that the arabesque started to become not just bifurcated, but multifurcated. So we still start to see different formations of the leaf. So leaf is no more just split, but split, and one of the sides of the split will be split again, and so on. So we see a development. But that's not the only development. We also see that they created this fleur at the end, and it was beautiful in a way, a design that was very welcome. And the other thing that is very important to see is that the stem started to be broken. Can you see this broken stem here, and in here, and in here? Breaking the stem gave us another, it opened up a new concept of creating compartments. I can break my stem and then create compartments out of my beautiful arabesque composition. So in a way, the arabesque started to try to find more ground, and because it was difficult, so this is where it started to break and to create compartments like this, but this is where the other non-arabesque vegetal motifs started to appear and to take over. But this is the Ottoman Empire up to the 17th century. But when we look at the 17th century, another part of the world, in Persia and in Isfahan, and we can see two different modes of arabesque developing. One mode is the arabesque leaf and stem started to be wide, to be grotesque in a way, to be bold. And that is what we see here. We see that the arabesque here as well became bold, and that it is creating a completely new formation for us. This boldness is very important because we see it develop later on when we go to Mughal India. And the second mode that we see is the thin arabesque. And so we have this thin and thick arabesque. Actually, they coincide together. So from 17th and 18th century Persia and Mughal India, we see both of these modes springing up. What we see here is, this is the actually part of the first page of a manuscript, from a Quran manuscript from Kashmir from the 18th and 19th century. And if you just look at it here, you may not be able to identify where the arabesque leaf. See, this is my arabesque leaf, which is here in blue. This is the one in yellow. And this is another arabesque leaf, and now it's not only split into two, it's split into three. So we see now that the arabesque started to be thick and bold in a way. But we also see it here in another Kashmir Quran, and if you look through this, but I can do another thing, and that is what happens. If I read the other designs, you can still see the arabesque clear. So it is actually there, and it is bold. And it is not just bold, but it's all filled with tiny flower buds. And that is very important in the Indian decorative repertoire. So in a way, we understand that this was a development from the 17th, 18th to the 19th century. And we look at another media, which is a robe, a dolman robe, because it is cut from the back and it is wider, so it was used for riding. This Kashmir robe from the 19th century, we actually, if you analyze the design, you realize that it is actually, this is my leaf, and it is still, this is my leaf again, and split, and it developed in a way, as we see it here, it actually merged with the Bhuta, the very known design from the Kashmir period, but it was still there in here. So we know that the arabesque really, up to the 19th century India, it didn't die out. And from also the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, from Iran, Iran, Qajar, Iran, and up to later period of the Mughal India, we know that we have the second mode also springing. And the second mode is the thin arabesque. And this thin arabesque, as you can see it here, is a formation, is this formation, is really when you minimize the arabesque leaf to become just like an outline, but it's still there. And that is where it starts to create for you compartments. And in many of the art objects of India, you will see that this composition of just a compartment, one next to the other, actually flourish. Perhaps the origin of it is the arabesque composition as we see it here. See, this is a shield from Iran from the 19th century, and it actually has the name of, dedicated to Shah, to earlier Shah, and this is actually one of the albums, and you can see still it is very thin. The arabesque, it is nice and thin, developed, and it actually creates all of this frame, and it gives itself the liberty to conquer the border of this leaf. So what happened when it comes to our part of the world, which is Southeast Asia? Of course, what we call Southeast Asia the Malay world because there is so much in common. The Malay world is one world. It has one culture, it has one language, it has in many cases one basic religion plus other religions, and it has actually a ideology that we can see it in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Brunei, in parts, the Patani parts of Thailand, and in Singapore. And Philippines as well. So from the Malay world, we see that it was called the meandering waves. So the way it became like waves. From the 14th and 15th century, we see the arabesque conquering the religious books, whether it is Quran or folk tales, we still see arabesque coming in. And as we said, that it flourished in the with the religious manuscripts, and as you see, it is actually here, it becomes split, it goes up, it becomes split, and it goes up, and so on. So I still have my arabesque, and towards the early 20th century, we see it more stylized in this carving of wood, and we see the concept of the arabesque going up and down and creating its own loops and splitting, and out of it we split again, and so on. So actually in Southeast Asia, especially in relationship to the religious architecture and to the religious manuscripts, we see arabesque flourishing. And the other thing is that arabesque started to blend in, and we have the other local actually motifs coming in and merging itself and taking part in the the development of the arabesque in Southeast Asia. Now, what happened if we go to another part of the world, which is Latin America? Has it really reached Latin America? Yes, the arabesque was carried by the Mujahids, Majores, or something like that, who went to and they went to actually Latin America, and they took with them this design and this pattern, and they developed it, and we of course see it in the Iberian Peninsula in the Alhambra vases in here, and that is just one unit that we can see with our very traditional mirror image deformation, and this is from the Alhambra vase, which is that high part of the Islamic Arts Museum religious collection. But we had the opportunity to work with one of the Islamic art scholars from Latin America, who was not just able to identify the leaf in different parts of Latin America, especially in Chile and in Argentina, but also that he pinpointed as something that was very important to us, is that this leaf in Latin America is called alturic. Alturic, and the root word of alturic is al-tawriq, which comes from the waraqa. So actually they did not just carry over the design, but they also carried the term that was given to this design. So all of this could not have been built up through 1,000 years just because an artist drew it freehand. It would not have survived that long, and in this very orderly manner. So when we started to analyze the design, as we analyze all of the Islamic designs, we start with the dot and with the circle, and we replicate that circle, and it becomes smaller units, and these units can be actually these tips can be connected, and when they connect, we can actually come up with the space where the arabesque leaf can actually fit in a way very orderly, and that is the breakdown of this tile. This is a tile with this water wheel effect of the arabesque design from the 17th century, and I did not pick up an easy design. That is a very sophisticated, complicated design, but when you see it, it is still my arabesque, and it is actually in its mature stage. So when we look at geometry and we understand that geometry plays a very important factor in the development of the arabesque leaf, I come back to this tile which I showed you earlier, which is from Ottoman Turkey from the 1520s, and I would like to pinpoint. We have seen that it had the two modes of design, and I would like also to show you how is it formed, and that necessitates that I actually end my presentation to come back to tile. I will show it once more.